The victims really are anybody and everybody. I mean, we see victims or survivors, as I like to refer to them, of all ages. You know, one of the things that we've seen for a long time is that there's a direct link between the increase of opioid usage in our community and the increase in trafficking survivors. And to Detective Morgan's point of, earlier, is that young ladies get addicted and they start doing things that they otherwise wouldn't do. And it puts them in a really bad spot.
And from your perspective, how often do you see that?
Well, of the people that we see, about 50% of them come in through our detox program, and about 50% of them come in through our shelter.
Wow. Detective Morgan, can you talk to us about, you and I talked a year or so ago about a particular case that made the news. Can you talk about how common is it and how do you catch these people who are perpetrating this crime?
Well, our victims, we are notified of our victims through many different ways. Some through our non-governmental organizational partners, like the ones here, whether it be from the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, from the Renee Jones Empowerment Center, from a lot of the people that we have spoken with, talked to, such as our SANE nurses through area hospitals. And they come in many different ways, many different forms. People have this idea that this only occurs to low-income people, our kids who are runaways or our adult victims who may be in poor neighborhoods, and that's just not the case at all. I mean, we see a wide range of people, and it affects everyone, from ages from, I think we've recovered as young, with our task force, as young as 14 to as old as 66. We're talking about a wide range of individuals, age-wise, as well as race and gender.
So talk to me about, this is not just women though.
No, it's not.
No, we have actually worked with clients that were male clients. We had, unfortunately, a couple young men that were sexually exploited by their older brothers or siblings. And really, when you think about another population that's vulnerable, is individuals from the LGBTQ community. Unfortunately, in some households, parents will kick their kids out the house if they don't identify with the sexual orientation or their faith. And what that tends to do is set up these young men, a lot of them are young men, to have to engage in risky behavior just to have their basic needs met. And then what starts happening after that, individuals take advantage of them and begin sexually exploiting them.
So talk to me about, a lot of people are probably sitting out there watching, I live in Westlake. Oh no, this is never going to happen to anybody in Westlake. Explain how, and Karen, maybe this is you, explain how can it happen to that suburban person who, maybe have a job or maybe in high school and is, doing fine and all of a sudden something happens?
Well, the key is that human trafficking, victims are forced, they're tricked, or they're manipulated into doing things they would never choose to do, and then they see no way out, and they're not about to tell anybody. So that someone from any neighborhood, growing up, teenage years, you're extremely vulnerable. You're working hard to do well in school, you're working hard to be accepted by your peers. Sometimes there's just multiple issues going on, especially at that age. So the vulnerability, and then if something's going on at home and kids leave home, and then they think they've survived, they're feeling pretty good, and they end up on the street or at the mall just feeling kind of low. Traffickers are very good at spotting it. They spend a lot of time just watching who walks as though they know where they're going and who looks a little bit lonesome or down and out, even though they're from, they're not down and out economically. So the vulnerability is what it's all about. It's not socioeconomic, it's not race, it's not gender. It's really all of us are vulnerable in some way, and traffickers are good at knowing who's vulnerable to what. And
this isn't necessarily somebody driving by and stopping the truck and throwing you in there and taking off.
That has never happened. To my knowledge, all the cases that we've had throughout the years, it's never happened where someone has been snatched off the street in a white panel van and taken and forced into, to perform sex acts. What I would like to say, though, is that a long time ago when we first started these investigations, traffickers used to groom in person. Now with the internet, they can groom kids, they can groom adults for months before anyone would even recognize certain signs that, hey, my son or daughter or my loved one might be in trouble with something, because the trafficker has already been grooming them for 3, 4, 5, 6 months.
How are they making contact?
Through social media, through online, through Facebook.
Absolutely.
And a lot of our teenage girls that we engage with through Project STAR and at the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, they're connected to this crime by another female peer who is already connected in the field, who's working with a trafficker, and it might be their best friend, somebody they go to school with, someone at the neighborhood, will tell them, hey, you can make a little extra money doing this. It's not that bad in the beginning, you'll get used to it. And once that happens, that young lady starts a cycle that's really hard for her to get out of, because she's been connected through somebody that she trusted that opened the door to this lifestyle for her.
What's the difference between this and prostitution?
Well, the difference, that's a good question, because everybody asks that question. The question is that you have prostitutes, escorts, streetwalkers, whatever you want to call them, who are what they call independent. They work for themselves. They make money for themselves. We are referring to the ones who are forced into doing this and turn all the proceeds of what acts they did, what sexual acts that they completed, over to someone else. They're the ones making the profit off it. The person who is performing these acts doesn't see a dime or doesn't see all of the money. Anybody who takes any little bit of money from anyone for a commercial sex act is a trafficker.
Why don't they just leave?
It's hard for them to leave. We like to use the word Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bonding, because a lot of times this trafficker is meeting the basic needs for this individual. They're taking care of them, they're giving them food, they're giving them shelter. And sometimes the situation that these young ladies leave from at home is sometimes worse situations. Majority of the young ladies we work with had a previous sex abuse that they experienced before they were trafficked, and a lot of times that person who sexually abused them is still within the home. So they're like, do I go back home to this abuse, or do I stay in this situation that they may think that they have some type of control over? And it's really hard. Think about embarrassment, shame, and just having loss of self, and don't really have a connection to their family and friends, because these traffickers will isolate them from family.
And that's part of the manipulation. I mean, Bo can attest to this. I mean, we've taken a lot of people to the shelter who've been victimized, been victims, and now are survivors, but they feel as if there's still a connection between the trafficker and herself or his self, and they run back to the trafficker. Now, there have been instances where we've recovered some individuals 4 or 5 times that they've run back to the same trafficker. But again, that all goes back to the fact of the manipulation and the grooming, where this trafficker made this person believe that you cannot survive without me. I am the one who is going to take care of you. And in some instances, this may have been the only person that actually showed that they loved them.
Absolutely.
But is there violence associated with?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You have what we tend to call the guerrilla pimps, and these individuals, they use force to have victims submit by any means necessary. They will beat them, stab them. We've had survivors that we've worked with that have been shot and that witness other people experience extreme violence, so they control them by using the violence.
So is this also they're threatening their families, they're threatening anything and everything they can possibly do?
Threatening families, threatening the family dog, we've seen. But on the other hand, there's also one that we call a finesse or a Romeo pimp, who may not use the same level of physical violence on his victims. He's more using psychological manipulation, but in every instance there is some sort of violence, where this person may not beat every one of the people, every one of the victims in his stable or under his control. He may isolate one person to beat. So he may beat that one person so that everybody else can see around them what's going to happen to them if they don't fall in line.
And another reason why they say, and I think Bo hinted on this a little bit earlier, is because of the drug addiction. The drug addiction, some of these guys, they would give them a little bit of heroin, because if a person has not had the fix, they're sick. I mean, the insides is just being twisted. They're defecating out every orifices. It's like the flu on steroids. And when that happens, the trafficker would give them just a little bit of heroin, say, hey, here's a little bit to take the edge off. You go out and turn tricks, make this much money, and when you come back, I'll give you a little bit more. And for that person that's addicted, it's a cycle that never stops. But I also tell people, we always think of like these really highly addictive drugs, like heroin, crack. But I've seen individuals who are addicted off of just traffic off of their alcoholism or off of marijuana. It's whatever that individual is addicted to, the trafficker can use it to control them.
And again, I want to stress this is covering all socioeconomic,
Yes.
all ethnicities, everything. There is no one who is really averse. What do you tell parents? What's the best advice you can give to parents if they have sons or daughters that potentially could be vulnerable?
Pay attention to your children. Talk to them. I remember being at a seminar once when the panelist was asked, FBI, and they expected some fancy explanation, and he simply said, traffickers pay so much attention to your child. They spend time with them. They listen to them. They get to know them. And that's what parents, neighbors, we all need to do with children, neighborhood children, is pay attention, spend time with them, because that's what the traffickers do.
We've talked about this before, but if you notice, everybody has a cell phone, and everybody doesn't have a flip phone anymore. They have a phone where they can access the internet. We've always taught that, do not let your child go to bed with that phone. Have a central charging area in the house where everybody's phones are charged in the kitchen, because what's going to happen is that the child will take that phone to bed and start texting people that you're not aware that they're texting, whether they're on some app like Kik or something where you're not really going to be able to see the chats, and even if it's a Facebook chat. But the other big thing is that we as a society anymore don't sit down and we don't have dinner with our kids anymore. We just do not. Everybody's running, everybody's doing something else. And when they're sitting down at dinner, everybody's on their device. If you go out to a restaurant and you look around, there's always kids on a device instead of just sitting there talking. When you don't communicate with your children anymore, these are the type of things that can happen.
And I'll just extend and say, I think all of that is great, but I also think we need to think about prevention on the other end, and we need to have honest conversations with our youth at an early age about healthy relationships, consent, bullying, and that we just don't buy people to have sex with them.
I think it's important too that it's not just the school's job. We need to start talking about it at churches more. We need to start talking about it at Boy Scout meetings, Girl Scout meetings. As parents, while we're watching soccer games and basketball games, it needs to be a common conversation that we have.
We're talking to our kids about drugs now, hopefully. But
Hopefully.
Are we talking about human trafficking? Is that message getting out?
It's starting to. We need a lot more schools, a lot more community organizations, and just individuals as a whole to become more aware of this topic, the red flags and the prevention side of it.
And the internet piece is a really key piece, because I believe there was a study from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children that said between 2000 and 2010 and 2015, there was an 846% increase in the number of reports regarding suspected sex trafficking. And that's directly correlated to use of the internet. So it's the internet is really a good thing, and it really has some issues that we all as adults need to pay attention to.
It can be a very dark thing too. Karen, Ohio, 4th in the nation.
4th in the nation. The National Human Trafficking Hotline Resource Center does statistics for the number of calls that they receive about reports of human trafficking. For the last 2 years, Ohio has ranked 4th. And people say, oh my gosh, you mean we have the 4th highest amount of trafficking in the state of Ohio? And I tend to look at it kind of in another way. In fact, I did some research over the weekend, and I found that in 2012, the first year that we had a human trafficking awareness program in January, Ohio ranked 12th. And every year since that, we've gone up to 8th, then we were 6th, then we were 5th. Now for the last couple of years, we've been the 4th highest. What I hope it means is that through the education of the people here on the panel, the people in the audience, people across this greater Cleveland who are really working hard to raise awareness are truly making a difference. So that the 4th highest means that people see something and they say something, that they're not hesitant to call law enforcement because law enforcement is out there every day trying to say we're victim-centered. Social services are out there. You know, here we have the STAR hotline. We have the services for residential care and drug treatment. And so I think there's a lot going on. So while trafficking is increasing on the internet, it's an old crime that we gave a new name to, and we're working hard to recognize it and report it.
We've mentioned the STAR hotline a couple of times. We never gave the number. Can you give us the number?
The number is 855-431-7827. And people can call that hotline 24/7, 7 days a week. And on the other end will be a professionally trained staff member from the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center who has received additional training around the topic of human trafficking and crisis intervention that can talk with the individual, see about resources that's available to them, or if it's a professional that's requesting that one of our members respond out into the community. So we will respond to social service agencies, law enforcement, and medical facilities 24/7. It could be 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the morning. Someone will meet that survivor there at the hospital and start working with them.
We're still talking about who these survivors are. I want to bring up Karen McHenry. She's in our studio audience, and I want her perspective because she's with the Belfair Center and deals a lot with missing and homeless youth. And while she's making her way up, can you give that number again, Teresa?
It is 855-431-7827.
All right, Karen, I'm putting you on the spot here. So
Okay.
from your perspective, working at Belfair, where do you see this problem?
So, well, we have Belfair's program for homeless and missing youth, and we have a 24/7 hotline. And just this morning, there's 179 kids missing in Cuyahoga County. 179 kids, and 99 of them are girls under the age of 18. So they could be in a situation, especially with the weather, where it's not safe. You become more isolated in the winter. We work closely with schools and all of our community partners to make sure that these youth and these families know that we're here for them when they're ready. We work really closely, as I said, with the sexual assault nurse examiners. So we know that these kids are vulnerable. The social media piece is huge. A lot of these kids, as John said, are in the middle of the night or talking to strangers.
And when how many of these kids that you're dealing with have come from that background?
Being victims of trafficking?
Yes.
I would say that, you know, we probably at least 20% of the kids that we deal with that are missing have been touched by some type of an abuse, particularly probably a much higher percentage are victims of sexual abuse.
And these 179 kids who are missing right now, we don't know where they are, is what you're saying.
We don't know where they are, and we're out there looking for them. We have a street outreach team, so we go out there and we go out on the streets and we try to bring them in, or we try to reach their friends or go to their schools and see if they're really in safe situations, or if it's a dependency case and there's issues at home, or work closely with Cleveland Rape Crisis, because many of the girls and boys are victims of sexual abuse. And I know that that's something obviously that's going on. A lot of people are telling, and you know, what happens when you tell mom and she doesn't believe? You know, so then your trust is violated. And the other really sad statistic is that like 32% of all kids that are victims of trafficking are trafficked by an immediate family member, whether it's the brother or the grandma or the mom, and they're in a situation and they're trying to survive. So Belfair, again, is there to provide help and hope, and we, like Project STAR, have a 24/7 hotline where we can answer questions or do problem solving and work with them in a way that's trauma informed.
Any comments or questions for our panel?
No, we just all collaborate 24/7 because this doesn't happen 9 to 5.
If I may.
Yeah, good point. Absolutely. Very good
Monica,
point.
if I may.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay, thanks.
A lot of people don't believe that it happens here, that it doesn't happen in their community. I can say last year, our task force, which is comprised of the Department of Homeland Security Investigations, Special Agents, Independence Police Department, and the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Office and the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office. We recovered or identified 135 victims last year. Of those 135 victims, 24 of which were children. That isn't even counting the number that our other partner, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, what they recovered. So you have multiple agencies working in unison to try to combat this, this violation. So for those who think that doesn't happen here, tell that to those 135 victims that we recovered last year.
Speaking of, we just got a question from Facebook, and again, using the hashtag #HappensHereToo, TOO, on Twitter and Facebook. Wendy wants to know, what should I do if I feel my friend is in danger?
There's several things that she can do.
Well, you could call the Project Star hotline and process the phone call. And if there's red flags that pop up for us, we definitely say, hey, connect with the task force, and we'll give them that information. They can call their local police department, but definitely reach out to either one of the entities. But I always say call the tip line that the task force has set up.
And one thing I would say is one of the things the collaborative's done is really work with its partners to get all of this signage up, whether it's on buses or it's at the airport, it's on billboards. And it simply says happensheretoo.org. It doesn't have a number. If you can't remember the number, go to happensheretoo.org and you will find what is trafficking, who's trafficked, how does it happen, what are the numbers to call. It has the Star hotline, it has the Sheriff's Office, it has the National Hot, it has all kinds of resources, as well as a listing of the 35 or so organizations that are working together in Greater Cleveland to build a comprehensive and coordinated safety net so that people don't fall through, because the victims are showing up. Some have been trafficked 60 years ago. Some were trafficked 6 minutes ago. So we need to have hotels educated. We need to have hospitals educated. We need schools and schools teachers educated. We need airport, RTA employees, because you never know where you're going to see it. And then it's like, who do I call? What do I do? All of that information is at happensheretoo.org. And I also have, we have a number of rack cards like this to show that there is no one face to this crime. And these are available if you want them for your school, for your public library. We have cards to get the word out there that it's not a faraway problem.
And it also helps for those who might be a little sensitive about having that conversation. You know, in Wendy's case, you're just giving her tips, because I can imagine if her friend is truly in a situation where maybe she doesn't want to leave, now she has options to, she doesn't have to handle this alone.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
and
go
I'll
ahead.
just say that I think the other thing of it is start from a place from believing. And don't try to rescue. We quickly go from hearing a disclosure that somebody is in this dangerous situation and want to quickly save them and remove them from that situation without all of the resources available, and not knowing once you remove them, where do they go next? So I also say start from believing and know other organizations in the community that are able to reach out and provide services.
What I would say to Wendy is, Wendy, if your gut's telling you something's going on, say something. We've had too many violent, heinous crimes that have occurred in Cuyahoga County, and the only reason why they were allowed to go on as long as they did is because no one has said anything. If someone would have said something, those 3 girls probably could have been rescued a lot sooner than they were. You can't tell me that somebody didn't see something. What they did was they didn't say something. So what we tell all of our partners out there is, don't be afraid to call us, Star Hotline, call us. We will come out. And if there's nothing there, we're not going to be mad at you. We're going to come out and we're going to assess the situation. Something is going on. It may not be sex trafficking. It could be something else. But something is going on. But if you don't say anything, we would never know, and no one could get help.
I know that you know, there's been a number, like hairstylists, for example, have gone through some training. What is that training? Like, what should, if I'm sitting next to somebody in the hair salon and I see something that doesn't seem, what am I looking for?
So I do a lot of those trainings for hairstylists and hair salons across Northeast Ohio. And one of the things that I've noticed in speaking and engaging with a lot of the cosmetologists is they'll say, it's this guy. He comes into the shop once or twice a week with different girls. He wants their hair a certain way, and he doesn't leave them alone. He stands right next to them. And it's just so strange because he always has a different set of girls when he's coming in. And that's a red flag. That can be a red flag for many reasons. But one of the things I said to them is that if they notice that, one of the things they can implement in the salon is that if you're not receiving a service, you can't cross this path, because this is where only customers, if you're at the shampoo bowl, you're allowed to ask, are you safe? Do you need help? Here's a number for you, and pass them the card, a hotline card. And just putting that little measure in place can help a long way. Also, when they're washing their hair, these girls experience a lot of physical violence. Do you feel lumps and bumps in the hair? Do you see visible signs of scars? And the traffickers, they brand their girls with tattoos. And that's one of the ways that they show ownership, is by having them have a tattoo. And if they see a tattoo, you see a lot of daddy-o tattoos, daddy's little girl. We've seen people that have tattoos that say, I'm blank's whore. So you can ask them, hey, what does that tattoo mean to you? What's the significance behind that tattoo? And that right there can open up a conversation to let the person know that you care about them, and you might be able to get them some help.
But it's not just hair salons. Who else should be watching and reporting?
Everybody.
We at the task force, in part with all of our partners in law enforcement, have gone out and tried to train anybody and everybody who comes in contact or who could potentially come into contact with a victim. We did complete EMS in service, so all paramedics can recognize the signs. Building and housing inspectors from Cleveland Municipality. We've dealt with emergency room physicians, the same nurses. They already know what's going on. But we've tried to go out and do a wide spectrum of first responders, because a lot of the times a victim may not talk to law enforcement because they've been trained not to talk to law enforcement, but they may talk to someone else they come in contact with, a fireman, a paramedic, a nurse, a doctor, somebody who they will trust other than law enforcement. So we've tried to get out there and expose this to anyone and everyone who may come in contact with a potential victim.
So bottom line, if you deal with the public in any way, shape, or form, know what to look for.
Absolutely.
Airline attendants.
All right, I want to talk about hotel workers, because where is it that these people, if for lack of a better term, do their business? And I would assume a hotel?
A lot of hotels.
Yeah, hotel. But we partner, again, one of our partners is the Ohio Hoteling and Lodging Association. Prior to the RNC, we were able to train through that agency a lot of hotel workers to get them to understand the signs and what these signs may turn into. And I'm not going to name the hotel, but we have received several legitimate tips and phone calls from a lot of the hotels that we've trained, from the front desk clerks, from housekeeping, from even the bellman, who will come in contact with these people at the door, who will send us tips. Obviously, we're not going to talk about where they're coming from, but yes. And there's some that we aren't able to reach out to. There's some that are privately owned that, believe it or not, don't care. As long as those rooms are rented, they just want the money.
One of the key things we worked with in doing those trainings for the hotels was to bring in law enforcement. So actually, many of us were at those trainings, and the idea is, who's law enforcement? So get on a first name basis between the hotel managers and front desk people with your local law enforcement, so that when you have a suspicion, you can call them and they're not coming in with blaring lights. They can just come in and walk through and just have a good sense of what's going on. Or if you need to call the STAR hotline for a victim piece, all of that is in the mix. But everybody can, there isn't an industry that can't be trained.
And for the hotel workers, it's really important for them just to pay attention, because there's some small signs that may be red flags for trafficking, such as a room that is there for rented out to the same person for several days, and they don't want housekeeping in a room, but they're constantly getting new and clean sheets, and you see a lot of foot traffic in and out of the room. That might be a possibility. There's some trafficking situations going on in that room.
I want to bring up Donna Angelotti. She's with the SOAP program, and she's going to explain a little bit about what they do. But you had mentioned the RNC. Is it usually this problem is just big when we have big events in town?
Oh, no. No, what typically happens, though, when we do have large sporting events, like when we have the NBA Finals, or we have, other big events here, whether it's all-star games over the years, what it does is it increases the traffic of victims that are coming in from out of town. It's just like anything. The trafficker brings his victims in because they know there's going to be a large gathering of men for these sporting events or for other conventions, and they want to take the opportunity to make some money.
A lot of these kids had domestic violence prevalent in the household. A lot of them also had individuals that may have been using drugs and alcohol and have to deal with their previous sex abuse. So you're not just dealing with the trafficking situation. We have to address all of the other things that happened to them before they were trafficked. And that can happen through counseling, whether it's talk counseling. We also talk about yoga is another yoga therapy, art therapy for the individuals. If they're ready to go into a group and process that with peers who have also experienced the same thing, that's another possibility. Connecting them to one or two to three mentors that are positive. And the reason why I say 2 to 3 is because we don't want one to be a connection and then that person leaves their life, because people have always come in and out and left these kids and didn't stay in for the long run. So definitely connecting them, counselors, mentors, making sure they are attached back to the school system. So many times these kids are detached from the educational school system. And we know that when youth are not going to school, that set them up for failure in so many areas and also increases their vulnerabilities. And then we start by telling them that they are worthy, that they are loved, and helping rebuild some of that self-esteem.
Thank you. We have another question from Facebook. Are there programs for high school students since this is such a major teen issue?
At the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, I know the collaborative, they do the same, and our partners, Bill Fair, that was just up here, we go into the schools to talk to high school youth about healthy relationships, bullying, trafficking, just a whole spectrum of violence.
I want to, Detective Morgan, I want to talk to the trafficker themselves is one thing, but without a customer, this business isn't going to work. So who are these people, and what do I do if I know someone is utilizing this service, if you will?
Well, let's start with, in the business we call him a John. Okay, the one who's pushing this. It's all about him. And when I say him, I mean him. Usually it's not a female. I'm not going to say specifically what age or what race or what gender. What I will say is this. When we've done operations, specifically street operations, in collaboration with the Cleveland Police Department in the 2nd District, within an hour we had 10 Johns. And one of those Johns was from the city of Cleveland. All of them, and these are, I'm talking about, we put out Cleveland police officers on the street acting as escorts or prostitutes. So what that tells us is that this is being driven by not the people from inside the city of Cleveland, but people who have a disposable income. People who are willing to spend some money to have these services rendered to them. And I'm talking about people like in suburbia, from all professions, whether it's doctors, lawyers, police officers, college professors, you name it. I can't tell you that, everybody thinks that it's us, it's the poor guys who are out here doing this. These are people with disposable income, CEOs of companies. You'd be surprised at the people that we have found actually trying to purchase commercial sex.
Does the punishment fit the crime?
No, absolutely not.
What is the punishment?
Absolutely not. I think the punishment for some is up to maybe 10 days in jail.
That's it?
With a ticket, and that's if it gets that far. Again, this is a crime that people always use the term it was a victimless crime, but we know that not to be true. You're furthering a person's business. You are, if you think about the person that they're buying commercial sex from and what it's doing to them. We've talked with many victims over the years that I've been doing this. And even the ones who aren't doing commercial sex, the young ladies who are in the gentlemen's clubs or the strip clubs, they call them, who are dancing for men, they have to in some way, shape, or form be of a different state of mind to be able to do this in front of a bunch of men. So you can't even imagine what is going through a person's mind when they have to do this 5, 6, 7, 10 times, have sex with different men, completely different. We've talked about how you have to the victim has to take themselves to a different mindset in order to do this, to perform, to make money for these guys. So I guess the point I'm getting to is, what is it that these Johns, do they think about this when they continuously victimize or continuously rape people every time they buy commercial sex?
I'll say that, over the last few years, we've seen a shift in how we treat trafficked individuals. At first, we looked at them as criminals. Today, we recognize that they're victims. And through the safe harbor law that we have actually now in the books, where we are able to hold these individuals, the traffickers, at a higher offense with a first-degree felony. They have to register as a Tier 3 sex offender. We've seen a shift with offender accountability, from criminal to victim. What we need to also focus on is, how do we hold people accountable at a higher rate in our society that buy people? And that should be the next conversation. We need to really think about it. Some communities have where if you go to purchase an individual, the vehicle that you arrive in will be taken from you and seen as a criminal tool. I mean, it's a step in that community, but we have to really find a way where we increase accountability for those individuals and not just send them to John School, just not give them 10 days in jail. That is not enough for an individual who is constantly being victimized in this field.
I think Teresa has a really good point in talking about, years ago we would talk about the girl on the street corner with her short skirt, and people would say, she knows exactly what she was doing, and we would blame the victim. Thank goodness, in recent years, the federal law has said that if a minor is involved in commercial sex, he or she is a victim. That's a huge generational change. It's a total paradigm shift. And I think what happens is we need to change our language at the same time. So when people talk about a child prostitute, there is no such thing. It's an oxymoron. A child doesn't consent. What happens is we need to start looking at the criminals who are either the person purchasing that child or the trafficker who's out there controlling that child. So she is a prostituted child. She's the victim of an adult action. And that's dramatic.
With our Johns, it used to be a time when, as Teresa mentioned, that there was a John school. For first-time offenders, if you were caught soliciting sex from a prostitute on the street, you'd be given a citation, and in lieu of going to court, you could go to John school and get it erased. But there never was a prostitute school. There never was one for people first time getting caught or cited for solicitation, that there was a place where they could go and get their record expunged if they took a class. So there's the disparity you see right there, and that was from a long time ago.
So contact your local Ohio legislator and say, get on this, we need new laws?
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right, we have another audience question. Hi.
Hello, my name is Sister Ann Victor, and I work for the Collaborative. One of the things that we mention a lot in training professionals is the term trauma-informed care or trauma-informed interviews. I suspect that perhaps if we describe that, parents and others could use some of the same techniques to be helpful and supportive to victims. So could some of the panelists describe the qualifications or the characteristics of trauma-informed care?
Thank you, sister.
Well, for us, for law enforcement, when we're talking about being informed that there's trauma that has probably taken place, more than likely, with your victim. So therefore, you don't want to be real forceful. I try to tell people that you don't want to come in with the bulletproof vest on and you don't want the gun exposed and all these other things, especially if you're a detective. Now it's different if you're a patrolman and that's your uniform of the day. But when you talk to this person, don't stand over them. Stand at eye level or even below eye level. If I'm in a hospital room and I'm talking to a victim, first time she's ever met me, I'm happy that she wants to talk to me. I find the shortest stool in the room and I sit on it. And I look her in the eye and I look at her as I'm understanding. And what I also do is give them space. I give them as much space as possible. If we can, if it's appropriate, we'll leave the door open because we don't want the victim to feel like they're enclosed because we don't know what environment they came from, what happened to them during their victimization. So we try to give them as much room, as much space, and talk to them in a soft voice, not some commanding voice where police officers are always using, but an understanding one.
And I'll say that, coming from a trauma-informed perspective mean that you understand how trauma might impact an individual's ability or inability to engage in services or to even get out of that lifestyle. And recognizing that the person's trauma response is going to be different from the next person's trauma response. There's no cookie cutter approach how people respond to their victimization. And also connecting them with a trauma-informed advocate, somebody that can support them through the entire process. And I will also say that you have to understand how people's cultural environment is going to influence their trauma response. So when you put all that together, you can respond from a manner where you take it away from how you think they should respond and just let people respond how they're going to and meet them where they are.
Great points. All right, we only have a couple of minutes left. Thank you, Sister. Bo, I want to give everybody a chance to do some final thoughts. We haven't heard from you in a bit, so I'm going to start with you.
I'm the quiet one on the group, so, and I don't mind because what wonderful resources we have in the community. I think that from my perspective, the biggest thing that I'd like John Q. Public to know is that when we have a person that walks through our doors, just because they walk through the threshold of Rape Crisis Center or the Salvation Army or Renee Jones Empowerment Center, it doesn't mean that immediately all the problems go away. And so there's grace that we have to use when we're dealing with these people. And truly it's about prayer, oftentimes, prayer for the people that do this work because it's not easy, prayer for those that are the survivors, and just the support from the community. So thank you very much for holding this and moderating it and doing all this. We appreciate it.
All right, Teresa, thank you.
Hey, yes, and I would just say, you know, remember that these individuals didn't ask for this lifestyle. Reserve your judgment and come from a place of care. Know the resources in the community, and if you forget any of the resources, you can always call the Project Star hotline, which is 1-855-431-7827.
All right, Detective?
For us, I don't think we gave out our hotline number. The number is 216-443-6085. That's the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Office radio room. When you call, you can leave your name. You don't have to leave your name. If you'd like to speak with one of us on the task force directly, the dispatchers will transfer you to us immediately. We respond anywhere in the county and or outside the county, depending on where we are and what we're doing, fairly quickly. So please, as we said earlier, if you think something is going on, make the call. Don't let it fester, don't let it go on, don't turn a blind eye to it, and don't put up blinders. If something feels like it's wrong in your gut, then something's wrong.
Karen?
I would say that this is a crime that involves all of us, whether it's sex trafficking or labor trafficking. It's extremely complex, and each of us has a role and a responsibility to learn more about it, to educate ourselves, educate those we care about, and to then basically what we say is bloom where we're planted. That you don't have to change your profession. You know, what is it you do? And be the best at that, aware of all the information about human trafficking that you may encounter a person. So the more you know about human trafficking, use that from where you stand, and all of us hopefully then will connect and weave that safety net so that our children and those children then who grow up are not left without resources. And I lastly would want to thank you, Monica, all of WKYC, for the opportunity to bring this information to a much broader audience than we have ever been able to in the past. And we're extremely grateful to you.
Well, it's our honor because this is something that affects all of us, whether we realize it or not. We all need to know. So a few more of those resources, happenshere2.org. Detective Morgan, can you give that phone number one more time?
216-443-6085.
And the STAR number?
855-431-7827.
And we're going to have those numbers on our website as well. And I encourage you, please, share this on your social media. Use the hashtag #HappensHereToo and get the conversation going wherever you belong. Thank you so much. Thank you to our studio audience, and thank you to you for watching.